It's me, Autumn and Lorena, joining me today. And we're going to be talking about this incredible TV series called The Crown. It's
Mhm.
already several seasons in. We're going to be doing a review of seasons 1 through 4 and a season 5 preview. And Lorena, you and I have been talking about The Crown before this recording.
Mhm.
Certainly, the British royal family have had a profound effect on the shape and development of the entire world. And much has been said about the outcomes of their influence.
Mhm.
No one can deny the continued interest of the inner workings of this family, in particular Queen Elizabeth, who recently passed away this year. Now,
Right.
as you and I have spoken before, my family is from a Commonwealth country. And, certainly we know the influence of this royal family. What are your experiences regarding the influence of the British royal family?
Well, let's see. I know that the royals were frequently talked about in my family, and I want to say it's almost a southern thing in a way that people mostly talk about the royal family in a very how would I say, more like a reverent or respectful manner. In the Northeast, it's just kind of like, eh, well, we made up after that, Revolutionary War, and okay, they come to visit, put out the good silver, it's all fine and well and good. But we were fascinated mostly by a historical standpoint, because I remember in a high school history class when people were asking about the royal family, they were like, is the queen, the head of the country? And they're just like, no, and this is why. So it was more of a inquisitive and historical thing in the Northeast, which makes sense because that's basically where the roots of the revolution were. In the South, where they had to take much convincing to get them to rebel against the mother country, things were much more laid back. They're just like, the British Army, the Navy, they don't really bother us that much. They kind of stay, off the shores. They don't like the weather here. It's hot. The king leaves us alone. We have, good enough commerce here. And that was the whole attitude. And even after the Revolutionary War, a lot of the formality and custom that you find in the UK, and I visited like about 4 times, is also an undercurrent in the South as well. We still have a tea culture, which is, sweet tea. You have to serve that. That is embarrassing if you were in the South and you do not serve, sweet tea.
That's right.
Buttermilk biscuits is basically, the British, they're like the great grandmother of it. Scones, when we have that. So there's a much more reverent tone towards England in the South.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, the influence of this family certainly has had an effect over so many of us. And over the last few years, we've been fortunate to see many adaptations of the royal family's lives in film
Hmm.
and on television. And one film for me comes to mind. It's The King's Speech, which starred Colin Firth as King George VI, who was the king during World War II in Great Britain.
Hmm.
Um, and, it made me start to think about the way royals have been portrayed in film and cinema. What are your thoughts on what comes to mind when you think about the way that the royal family has been portrayed in these sort of historical adaptations?
It's been a bit of romanticism mixed with realism. Like, I did not see the movie The King's Speech. This is interesting. I didn't see it. I didn't get a chance to see it in the theater, but I bought a Blu-ray copy of it. Have not seen it yet. Historically, I knew about that, and the way it seems that Hollywood, because for us, because we're not a monarchy over here, it's kind of like we have this romanticized, ideal of the royal family. So it's like all the pageantry, the pomp of the royal family. You always see, I say, there's always lots of bling. You always show like how opulent, that the houses are. I want to say that Buckingham Palace is probably the second most opulent shown in historical or royal fiction, I would say, from Hollywood. The first would be the Palace of Versailles.
Yes.
That's like that's like a whole nother level that's going up because as Americans we're fascinated with it because we do not live under a monarchy. So we like looking at it and just kind of like this is great. So we usually have a very romanticized version that's seen on the screen.
That is a very good point. We certainly do have a romanticized version of what their lives might be like. And, oftentimes when there are these depictions of their lives, they do tend to be somewhat controversial precisely for that reason. The series that you and I are talking about is called The Crown, and it is sort of shown in a mini series. Well, maybe not so much of a mini series with already 4 seasons, but it is an award winning show on Netflix
Hmm.
about the British royal family during the latter half of the 20th century. And it stars some of the best British actors currently, from today, including Claire Foy, Matt Smith, who you and I are going to be
Hmm.
talking about on Toxic Male Appreciation, just to name a few. So the series starts out with a focus on Queen Mary and King George the Sixth, who, as I mentioned before, was the king during World War II. But then it starts heavily to talk about the life of Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, who is her husband, and
Hmm.
Princess Margaret. Now, given the advantages that this family has, they also, throughout the series, have struggles and concerns often similar to our own. And so, with that being said, Lorena, what has been your impression of the series from what you've seen and from what you've heard about it so far?
From what I've seen, it has done a lot of humanizing and putting, I would say, um, a lot of visuals to things that I've read in history regarding the royal family, learning that, the name Mountbatten, which was actually anglicized a little bit because their real name was Mountbattenburg. Found that out in history class. I'm like, oh, okay, wait, why are they Windsor? I mean, I know I heard that it was Windsor, but how the heck did that, you know, come across? So what you saw in there, the whole way that the House of Windsor wound up being created. So I just thought that that whole struggle, what was going on with Prince Philip and his background and what was going on with Elizabeth now that she was no longer, Princess Elizabeth, she was Queen Elizabeth. The struggle that, that her father had to deal with, the struggle that they had to deal with the father's brother, her uncle, which I also found out from history like years ago, where he was supposed to be king and he abdicated, and that was a huge, huge scandal. He abdicated for an American divorcee.
Yes.
So to see that story, because we were just like, wait a minute, he was king of England, and he gave that up, and the crown passed to his brother. So you see like the family struggles that go on. The queen mother, how she tries, well, we'll say at the time, the queen mother, how she tries to keep a straight face, and Queen Mary, that chick, wow. So for me, it's like seeing all of that history that I had to take in school and saw and like documents and heard about, to see it put on screen, and just kind of put more of like a human face to what was going on.
It certainly did. And I think that certainly is a fantastic synopsis of a series that I felt was quite sympathetic and somewhat more realistic in portraying the royal family,
Mhm.
because there is that tendency to romanticize their experience. In this particular case, because of who they are, and also from what we see more or less from the
Mhm.
outside looking in. Um,
Right.
and of course, none of these series are without controversy. Certainly, we know that when we start to watch something like this, dealing with something like Queen Elizabeth's rule, which was one of the, is it the longest rule in the of all time?
I think it is the longest. I Yeah, I believe it is the absolute longest
Which
role.
is a huge accomplishment for any monarch, let alone for a monarch in our modern world where it just
Yes.
seems like it's impossible to hold on to power today. And then they dealt with very personal matters, like her relationship with one of the most significant prime ministers at the time, Winston Churchill.
Churchill, played by John Lithgow. I had to do a double take.
Yeah, he really did that role justice. And
Mhm.
certainly, he's another performer who certainly did the role its due. Winston Churchill is such an iconic individual who also
Mhm.
shaped history and the world today. So his influence is still being felt. And I have friends who are constantly quoting Winston Churchill because he was just such a master at the English language, that practically everything he says is like, oh, some sort of wisdom or knowledge that you're gaining.
Mhm.
But certainly, Winston Churchill was her first prime minister as queen. And so there was that, knowing her for so many years as a young royal and growing into
Mhm.
a woman, especially in season 1, where she became essentially more of an independent leader. But that relationship she had with the prime minister was quite focused on during the series. And one can understand the role he played, especially after her father died, somewhat early in his
Mhm.
life. And she lost that father figure. So certainly, it was very interesting to also see the struggles that Winston Churchill went through at the same time. So that was very interesting. I personally was quite surprised to see how detailed they spoke about her marriage between her and Prince Philip, Lorena.
Mhm.
Certainly, that was not something that I thought we were going to see as much detail. And it certainly was not anything that is easy to talk about. We see a lot of situations where people and their private lives are shown, and it's not always the easiest thing to go ahead and see those details. So I think it was very interesting for them to decide to show that. And I hope I
Mhm.
have these images right. This is the one I want to show. I just to make sure that I am doing this correctly here. This picture of Claire Foy and of Matt Smith here
Mhm.
in these roles as Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. He was never able to take the title of king. He had to settle for prince. And he was always literally told that he was one step behind her. And we saw this throughout her life. His role, he was told very clearly, the job is making sure that she's okay. You have to take a step behind. But it also had an effect in their marriage, and it made sense that it would. What did you think of Matt Smith in this role, Raina?
First of all, I am very thankful to House of the Dragon for introducing me to Matt Smith. So when I saw him in this role, it sounds kind of cliche, but for me, it felt like the pictures and the video that I had seen of Prince Philip was actually living. He basically did an awesome job at showing the man who, the woman that's my wife that I love, she's not just my wife, she is the queen of England. And that's a stark difference. That's a role that she has to play, and he has to deal with his very human feelings about that. You know, the one of the I guess one of the ones that kind of like broke my heart the most, and you could see it through his performance, was the thing that their children would not have the surname of Mountbatten. They
Yes.
would have the surname of Windsor.
Yeah, and they were quite explicit. There were a lot of things that he had to accept to be with this woman. And I remember watching the television program where
Mhm.
oftentimes certain members of the family would say, well, who is this man? And he had responded, well, my father was, a prince of two nations, and my mother was a princess, and I thought to myself, yeah, that's true. His father was actually, I believe, might have been the king of Greece. Certainly not just an ordinary person, but, Elizabeth fell in love with him, and the family approved of the match eventually. She managed to make it work. But there
Mhm.
were going to be struggles in this match. It wasn't going to be an easy transition for either of them, and certainly she wanted it to work. I think, it would mean that she would have to make sacrifices in the marriage. In fact, in season two, Lorena, there's quite
Mhm.
a lot of focus on the notion, or at least the implication of the fact that they may have wanted to kind of end the marriage, which was quite scandalous at the time. Um,
Very.
even talking about this feels, I'm not even quite sure how I felt about watching it, Lorena, because at the time, Queen Elizabeth was alive when that came out. I think it was in maybe 2018.
Oh.
And the thought of even talking about someone's marriage, especially in those early days of a marriage, certainly I would feel very uncomfortable trying to put this in an adaptation for a television program. But they did it. And I think they did it with dignity. I think they had to show that this was not going to be easy for either of them. And they
Mhm.
also showed, I think, Prince Philip, despite any flaws and issues, I think that Matt Smith certainly played the role with dignity, which was something that I had every confidence he could do, but I wasn't quite sure how Prince Philip would be portrayed, considering any kind of indiscretion or misstep he may or may not have had. So that was something that I was concerned about. But we also see some parts of the program, and
Mhm.
these are just some other shots I was looking for. Okay, yes, we also see part of the program where Queen Elizabeth has to do like something that would really be considered somewhat impossible, while it's not, unusual for the time for your family to be concerned about who you may or may not marry.
Mhm.
Princess Margaret, who is on the right, and I can't remember the actress who plays this role, but this actress, she did such a fantastic job of portraying Princess Margaret, and I
Agreed.
believe her name is, and I think I have it in front of me. Her name is Vanessa Kirby, and she plays Princess Margaret for seasons one and two. She is Queen Elizabeth's younger sister,
Mhm.
and it is quite tragic because apparently Princess Margaret falls in love with this incredibly charismatic officer by the name of Peter Townsend, who
Mhm.
unfortunately is with someone, and then he divorces this woman, and it causes a problem for so many reasons. Lorena, can you imagine having to tell your sister that she cannot marry the man that she loves? It truly was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen in a television program. Lorena, I had heard about this story, and you and I both heard about it. Um,
Mhm.
her having to step away and publicly say I won't marry Peter Townsend. Essentially, if she did, she'd have to pretty much leave Great Britain without any
Mhm.
money and not live in Great Britain because they felt that this entire thing might hurt the monarchy. Now, that is up for debate, but Lorena, what a difficult decision to make. And what did you think of how it was portrayed and treated in this series?
I thought it was treated very well. I liked the struggle that you saw Elizabeth dealing with between being Elizabeth the sister and Elizabeth the queen. And it all hails back to the letter that Queen Mary wrote to her when she became queen. She was just like, you have to put away Elizabeth and you have to basically become Elizabeth Regina, which is basically you're the queen. And you see, she's trying to figure out, maybe I can do this, maybe I can do this instead. She does deserve to be happy. Maybe I can try this, maybe I can try that. But when it came down to it, she reluctantly and then finally accepted the fact that she had to do what she needed to do as queen because the realm was more important. It is what it is than her sister right now with marrying this man. So it's like my heart just broke and I loved the acting between the two of these women when Elizabeth had to say, you cannot marry this man. If you do, basically you're broke and you're going to need to have to get out of the country. And Margaret's just like, I will never forgive you. And that hurt. So you could tell that hurt so much. But she was just like, I will never forgive you for this.
It certainly was painful to watch. And I think that the fact that they had time to tell the story as it kind of, played out in somewhat more of a realistic fashion, it seemed to happen over the course of 3 to 4 years. At
Hmm.
a critical moment for Queen Elizabeth, she was still very, very young. And of course, at a critical moment for Margaret, I'm not quite sure how I would feel to have to still deal with something such incredible heartbreak. But they certainly did do an incredible job of showing us this. And,
Hmm.
it was almost as if you were experiencing this loss for Margaret. Certainly, she gave up so much just to make things work out because she also has a respect for the monarchy and for her sister, and she loves her sister. And she
Hmm.
certainly did it, not just as a sacrifice because I don't think she could survive, let's say, without support, but also to keep the peace within the family, which is the things people did back then quite often, where they would sacrifice personal ambition and desires, especially in that time period in the in the globe. People would just say, "Yeah, I just can't do that." I think that attitudes today are very different when it comes to wanting or trying to set a goal and doing it. So you certainly do feel for Margaret
Hmm.
in this series. Another thing that I noticed, Lorena, is how the stories focus on the idea of the Commonwealth nations
Hmm.
separating from the British Commonwealth and also wanting to be recognized as, independent countries now. And
Hmm.
it was almost something that I feel, I don't, I think it's very interesting because it seemed as if so many of them gained independence in such a short period of time. Perhaps right after, in this time period where we're talking about 1947 to, let's say, 1977,
Hmm.
where a lot of the series takes place with country after country, state, kind of separating themselves. They still have an affiliation with Great Britain, but
Hmm.
now they've become an independent country. And it isn't exactly a smooth transition. However, it was not anything that could be, kind of pushed to the side and ignored. It must have been very interesting going to these countries as a monarch and then a few years later returning. You used to kind of be a ruler there, but now
Hmm.
you're no longer necessarily a ruler because the natural order of things, the way that society has changed and progressed, is that you have accepted that they are going to separate from Great Britain. What did you think about that? I know there was one episode where, the Queen had to kind of dance with one of these leaders, and everybody was so shocked that she would agree to do this. But just to have respect for these other nations, I thought it was very interesting. Imagine having to deal with this as a monarch? What did you think about the treatment in the series regarding that?
It was very interesting. Um, I would say before these countries were independent, Elizabeth was kind of like, okay, I just carry on the way that I saw my father carry on for the most part. And that was the attitude in which she held herself. But when these countries became independent, she was a bit more, I would say, tactful. In a way, she was very cognizant that things had changed. And she seemed to be handle it with much, I want to say, with a bit more formality and deference, as opposed to, let's say, at first being, well, I'm a monarchy and we just, basically we own this country, for lack of a better term, to I am an invited guest here. So I kind of have to behave, accordingly. And I think with her, that was much easier because she was a modern woman. So many things had changed within a short span of time that she was very, very willing to roll with change. Like case in point, I'm kind of going back a little bit. One of the things that I remember from history, British history,
Mhm.
is that Princess Elizabeth II's coronation was the first British coronation that was broadcast on television. It had never been seen before. And the fact that she was open to that eventually, Churchill thought it was kind of gauche, but the fact that she was open, open to doing that. So yeah, that to me, that just seemed the attitude. And even later on in her reign, when I would see, video or news where she would go to another country, she was very formal, but she behaved as if she was a guest, not a ruler, or say like more like a visiting dignitary, so to speak, than a ruler. She always seemed polite. Um, she always seemed respectful.
Yes. Yes. And I agree with you. She certainly seemed to carry that theme. And, it's interesting too, in the sense of, oftentimes we'll see movies about, let's say, British rule in 1900 or 1890. And it is
Hmm.
quite different. Oftentimes it will be in different nations, perhaps on the continent of Africa or even in India, where we'll
Hmm.
see that they are in rule there. And it does have a very different feel. But I think that if we can honestly look at it from this point of view, that let's say maybe 50 years later or 60 years later, maybe one lifetime later, things have
Hmm.
changed dramatically all over the world. And there's a different sense of the effect of having that rule, and perhaps maybe being able to still keep the ties to, England, seemed to
Hmm.
be very important later on. Some of these nations needed support from Great Britain. I don't even know if they
Yes.
got it, but they absolutely kept those ties, Lorena. And you and I have spoken about that before, about the importance of those ties and what it means, even culturally, for so many of us. So I thought that that was very interesting. And then when the season goes into season three, or when the series goes into season three, there's actually a new set of actors. And here in this shot, it shows Claire Foy on the left, and then the woman who's wearing the black dress is Elizabeth Coleman, and she won an Academy Award, I think, for a movie. I can't remember the name of the film, but she had just come off of winning, or was about to win this Academy Award. And Elizabeth Coleman is a fantastic actress. So
Hmm.
what they did in the series was, for seasons 1 and 2, they kept the same actors. Kind of, it reminded me of what they did in House of the Dragon, where in certain points in their life, they had younger actors playing the role. And
Hmm.
Elizabeth Coleman would now be starring as Queen Elizabeth throughout the series. And I'm just trying to see if I can find a photograph of Elizabeth Coleman. And it looks like there's one here, although that's a little small, but here, well, you can actually see season one
Wow.
on the right, and then season 1 and 2 cast members on the right, and then
Mhm.
seasons 3 and 4 cast members on the left. So Elizabeth Coleman took the reins as the star, being Queen Elizabeth, and then
Mhm.
her husband, who is Prince Philip, was played by Tobias Menzies, who we see there. And something, Lorena, I always knew what Queen Elizabeth looked like as a young woman because we've seen pictures and we've seen her face.
Yes, we've seen so many pictures of her.
Yes, she certainly does look a lot like her, but I'm accustomed to seeing her as a mature woman, the way that Olivia Colman has played her. So that's the Queen Elizabeth that I feel like I know and grew up with. And season 3 focuses on the years between 1964 and 1977, which were some very interesting years for the Queen. In
Mhm.
particular, this is the time when Charles now was going to be have his investiture as the Prince of Wales, and I think he has to be a certain age to do that.
Mhm.
But also the death of the Duke of Windsor, who was her uncle, who had advocated from
Mm.
and kind of
Mhm.
thrust her into this role as the queen, and also the death of Winston Churchill. Now, I think it also was very interesting to note she does meet President Lyndon Johnson, and it is also the episode or the series that introduces us to Camilla Shand, who would later become Prince Charles's wife, and the famous comments about Camilla and Charles in kind of being a person of interest, I guess, if you will,
Mhm.
between Charles and Diana. So I certainly did appreciate that they showed that. And it continues in season 4, Lorena, which is the season that we had just seen. And perhaps maybe the most controversial season, Lorena, because in season 4, we finally do get introduced to one of the most important members of the royal family, as far as I'm concerned, Princess Diana, who at the time was known as Lady Diana Spencer.
Mhm.
And, of course, their wedding and marriage, Prince Charles's wedding and marriage to Lady Diana Spencer, was well publicized and on television. In
Yeah, I watched that.
Yes, certainly, we all remember the dress and how amazing it was to see her. She looked incredible. It was a worldwide event. And from what I
Mhm.
understand, I know in England, you and I talked about this, that when the wedding started, there was a surge in power because everybody had put their electric kettles on. Um, which I think is absolutely amazing, to see something like that. Diana is played by Emma Corrin,
Mhm.
who, of course, is the wife at the time who gets married to Prince Charles. Prince Charles is played by, who is he played by? Let's see if I can find this gentleman's name. He is played by Josh O'Connor. And it's kind of not the best picture of him there on the left, but that's him in this picture. And I think it's very interesting because certainly there's so many shocking things that happen in their relationship. And we
Mhm.
all loved seeing this wedding. It was wonderful. It was a happy, joyous event. And the series doesn't go into anything past the notion of them being a couple here and then trying to understand certain elements about their relationship at a time where most people have more of a modern marriage. Charles and Diana are being held to sort of these strict codes of,
Mhm.
what does it mean to be a royal in 1980? And certainly Margaret Thatcher, who is the prime minister at the time, I think it's played
Mhm.
by the lady who played uh, just Julian Anderson. She plays Margaret Thatcher in the series. Of course, we all know her from the X Files.
Mhm.
And I thought she did a wonderful job here. But certainly, the premise, or at least the idea of Diana being introduced to the family. And there's this famous episode where it's sort of like the test to see if she can handle being around the family, and everybody loves her. And
Mhm.
it was very interesting episode. But in the end, there were some sad things that happened in the story, including the unfortunately assassination of Lord Mountbatten, who, he and his family unfortunately were victims of that. But
Mhm.
also, they do deal with kind of a thorny subject now, the marital difficulties between Charles and Diana. And that certainly is something that they leave season 4 with. And it's absolutely something that has been depicted a lot and talked a lot. You know something,
Yes.
Kenya? I think that might have been the first public interview of a couple on television about their marriage in detail, in a manner I had never seen anything like that before this particular, unfortunately, situation between the two of them. It certainly was something that everybody watched, and I know Bashir was the interviewer for
Mhm.
each member of the family there for
Yeah.
Charles and Diana. She had the interview, and I think then he had his interview. It certainly was something that to be honest with you, uh, would be considered quite shocking even now. I think, although maybe more common today for people to tell their side of what happened in a marriage. And there are some people who keep all that stuff, under like a non-disclosure agreement. You can't talk about the settlement of the marriage. You can't talk about the details. Now people have
Mhm.
kind of maybe said, I don't want anybody to ever say anything about our marriage or breakup. But Lorena, this was the most I'd ever heard of anyone talk about intimate details of their marriage. Certainly very different change, or as they would say, I think in the Queen had said there's been a shift in values. And so, we're certainly going to be seeing a little bit more of that in the next season to come, Lorena. And I am
Mhm.
just so just I don't even know what's going to happen, necessarily with all the details, although I have a little bit more of the information. I know Imelda Staunton, and we know her from so many films, especially from the Harry Potter series,
Mhm.
now going to be playing the Queen at this point. She will be taking on the role and from Olivia Colman. So we're going to see her as sort of the new Queen Elizabeth. I'm just seeing if I can find a picture of her. And of course, it's all new. So we don't, I think there are a few images of her, but I do have more somewhere if I can
Okay.
find it. But it's going to be an exciting season to see this. And a lot of people have been talking about what will happen. Now we're getting actual pictures of the real royal family here in some of this, which is not necessarily.
So, okay, season 4.
Yes.
Season 4, because I didn't get to see season 4 yet. Season 4 ended how with Charles and Diana? Was it before their divorce?
Yeah, it seemed like it was before their divorce, and
Okay.
it was a bit, to be honest with you, it was hard to watch. And I'll tell you, well, at least I found it hard to watch, and I'll tell you why I found it hard to watch. Um,
Mhm.
I found it hard to watch because of what was going on behind the scenes. And this is what makes this series so remarkable, is that we are seeing so much of what's going on behind the scenes. And when I say that, I mean that I've noticed that we are getting these intimate details about their lives in a way that we really hadn't seen before.
Mm.
Sort of seeing Diana in Buckingham Palace, and pretty much being on her own, trying to get in contact with family members and not being able to get that contact. Some of it is quite heartbreaking. They have a disclaimer that mentions there may be disturbing sequences in the series, certainly things that were not, news breaking. We had heard about it, but perhaps we had never seen it depicted in a show in this way. And I
Mhm.
think that they did treat it with kid gloves, but it's still very difficult to watch. There are some heartbreaking scenes in it, and even a point where when Charles talks about his him agreeing to marry Diana, it's very hard to even talk about it. And I have to say, while it is a fictionalized story based on true events, it is
Mhm.
heartbreaking to see. And I don't have to tell you any of this stuff, Lorena. You and I both know this, all this stuff very well. We've seen
Yes.
quite a bit of it in the news, but it is quite different seeing it in a dramatization where it's filmed at the location of where, let's say, a lot of these details happen, including the filming of that interview
Mhm.
where I guess perhaps she's in the palace or one of those rooms somewhere where they have, such so many important things happen for the family from day to day,
Mhm.
that it is quite alarming in a sense. So you do feel like you witnessed it because it's in the surroundings that
Right.
royals are keeping themselves.
Right.
So I have
I'm
to say, it really is something. I'm kind of like, it is hard to watch. These are definitely intimate moments that are hard to watch, but it kind of leaves you at a point where you're wondering what's going to happen between them, because there's a sense that a mistake may have been made. A mistake was made,
Yes,
and
very much so. I'm trying to remember which previous. So it was before The Crown. I remember they did a mini series about Diana and her
yes,
life,
yes,
and the whole thing of Charles basically like, I this is not who I want, this is not who I want to marry. And Elizabeth is basically like, she needs to be this, she needs to be this, she needs to be this. So that's what you're going to wind up marrying. And it
yes,
just him, like, okay, I'm kind of stuck. I have to go and do this. And with Diana being the type of woman she was not what you would call your classical royal spouse. She did things much differently. And I know she would, like, when she would bring her kids like over here to America, like I remember, I think it was in Disney World when she bought, William and Harry there,
yes.
he would take them to like AIDS wards. She took them, I forget this one place in New York where she took them. She was very much a, they called her like the people's princess. She was very much like that. And that was not something that the royal family was really very, very fond of. And with Charles, it was just like, I'm not in love with her, but it's just like, you just do what do what you're told. And I can only imagine. I mean, that seeing it in that series was tough. So I can't even imagine how seeing it in The Crown will be once I finally watch it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I did want to bring up this article, Lorena, because you're exactly right. It certainly does deal with the notion, and I'm sorry about the Fiverr advertisements.
Yeah, no worries. It happens.
You make such a good point about that. And one of the things, since the series season 4 left off and such a sense of uncertainty and an uncomfortable level of expectation in a sense, around September when the queen passed away, um, the
Mhm.
writers were talking about just stopping filming because the queen did pass away. And out of respect for the queen. And here's the oh my goodness gracious, here's the actress. As I said, we all recognize her from Harry.
Dolores Umbridge.
That's right, there she is,
I
and she is
almost want
playing.
to say that's freaking. I'm sorry. I almost have to say that's just like perfect cast.
Isn't it though? I think she looks wonderful. I think that she's a very talented actress. I've seen her in many films, and as I'm sure you have. And I
Hmm.
love this sense of her playing the queen in her latter years. She certainly does look elegant. And I did just want to talk about this a little bit because, as I mentioned before, and you and I have talked about this, that Queen Elizabeth did pass away this year.
Hmm. Yeah.
And of course, pretty much the world, it shook the world. And they even stopped the production out of respect for her. And they talked about how The Crown is a love letter to her. And I've nothing to add for now, just silence and respect. And so much of the Crown series was about Queen Elizabeth. Certainly I could understand them explaining it this way and just going ahead and saying we have to stop right now. We're showing respect for her. It's a simple tribute and mark of respect. She's a global figure, and it's what we should do. So certainly, it says, and sorry for the advertisements, they have reportedly had plans in place for a while now. If this did
Mhm.
happen, and the series premiered in 2016, and because of what the series is about, it has gotten worldwide attention. Certainly something to think about when it comes to these events. Um, and as I mentioned to you already, Lorena, and probably a lot of the people who are going to watch this video know, the cast ages as the royal monarchy does as well, like what we saw in House of the Dragon. We really
Mhm.
enjoyed that, seeing
Yes.
that type of progression of people in the story. It says they replace the outgoing cast as a means to more accurately represent both the human aging process and the passage of time depicted in this series. So I thought that that was truly something that was very sensitive and certainly very important. Now, although it says it's expected to premiere on Netflix in November, you and I both know, I believe, that season 5 is actually going to premiere, I believe, on November 9th, Lorena. So you and I
Yes.
are certainly eagerly awaiting that. And I have one
Mhm.
other article that I did just want to share. And of course, season 5 is not without its controversy. In portraying a lot of things. To be honest with you, Lorena, I think that the writers had difficulty at this point, and I think it's mainly because of how it's not long enough to kind of separate yourself from these events that happened. They feel like
Mhm.
yesterday to me, and I have to give the writers credit for even wanting to go ahead and talk about this stuff. Um, and when the recent trailer was shown, Lorraine, let me just go ahead and share the screen. Um,
Mhm.
there was some backlash about it, and they had to
Mm.
put in a disclaimer. I mean, they did have a disclaimer or a bit of information before about disturbing scenes, but I thought
Mhm.
that this certainly was something that was needed to be put in for a number of reasons, Lorena. So in this Deadline article, literally just a few days ago, it says that Netflix add a fictional disclaimer to The Crown season 5 trailer following backlash about the trailer. Now, in this shot, and for those of you who are watching, this is clearly a picture of, I think it's Dodi El Fayed and perhaps his father.
Ah, yeah, they own Harrods.
Yes, and that was a fact. Yes, it is. And Mohammed Al Fayed,
Fayed. Mhm.
um, played by Khalid Abdallah and Salim Dow. And certainly, Diana's involvement with them did create some controversy with the
Mhm.
family. And I know that for some, there was some tension about it. And it says that the video for the 5th season trailer, Netflix states, inspired by real events, this fictional dramatization tells the story of Queen Elizabeth II and political and personal events that shaped her reign. I thought that that was very interesting.
That
The
is interesting.
It says the move comes after 2 years of lobbying from certain circles, including former Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden, who said in late 2020 that a health warning should be played before episodes so viewers know the series is a work of fiction. That health warning still doesn't appear in the current trailer, however, only in the YouTube description. The Netflix already uses the fictionalized line to press in press materials and in the landing page on Netflix. And it says the highly anticipated 5th season will likely be one of Netflix's most watched shows of the year. But since the death of Queen Elizabeth, it has faced a bumpy ride. Earlier this week, British A-lister Dame Judi Dench hit out publicly at the show for crude sensationalism in a letter to the Times, and 2 days prior, Deadline revealed that Netflix had postponed its Harry and Meghan Markle documentary series, which was due to follow the Crown's November 9th launch. The Crown producers have also been on edge filming the season 6 scenes in which Princess Diana is unfortunately killed in a fatal car crash. So Queen Elizabeth II died on September 8th, and they
Hmm.
paused the show, as we mentioned. Season 5 picks up in the early 1990s, followed the departure of Margaret Thatcher and relationship between Diana and then Prince Charles at breaking point. We have a new set of actors: Imelda
Hmm.
Stanton, as we mentioned, Elizabeth Debicki, and Dominic
Hmm.
West, replacing Elizabeth Coleman, Emma Corrin, and Josh O'Connor. I think that this is also really important because, as we know, there has been some kind of tension between some of the new royals that have now become part of the royal family. So, since
Hmm.
this series has started, a lot has been going on, Lorena. I think the wedding between Harry and Meghan might have been in 2016 or something like that. It was fairly recent.
Very recent.
They haven't been married long. And unfortunately, a lot of it has been wrapped around controversy for a number of reasons. But I can understand why there might be some sort of hesitation in the special between Harry and Meghan, because a lot of what we have been hearing is somewhat controversial, and I think somewhat inappropriate to air in a series that, or around a series that's supposed to be honoring the Queen. What do you think?
I would agree. Just to kind of back up a little bit, I find it kind of insulting as a viewer to have Netflix slap that disclaimer on there. It is very obvious from the beginning that this is a fictional account based on historical events. Very obvious to see that. So I don't really see the need, unless there was some kind of external pressure, which I believe you and I believe is pretty much exactly what happened, that they would put that on there. And as for Judy Dench, who I absolutely love to death, as for sensationalism, yeah, you need a little bit of that to sell this, but it is a fictionalization based on historical events. Some people are very protective of the royal family. And considering she's not a quote unquote, I'll say, not really a commoner, she's a dame, she's been given a title by the queen. I can understand where she's coming from with that. But at the same time, it's not, some people are just uncomfortable with that getting put into the public eye, fictionalized, or not. But I agree, this series for me is about bringing Queen Elizabeth to life. I mean, where you see Imelda Staunton, that's the Queen Elizabeth that I grew up seeing. She was like
Yes,
everybody's English grandma.
yes.
That's who I grew up with. That is why the main reason why I liked watching the series, finding out what she was like as, a young woman fixing Jeeps during, World War II, and finding out all that amazing life that she led up to, unfortunately, the point of her death, which I'm always going to remember her casket being in that Jaguar hearse that you could see. I'm like, Jaguar makes hearses now? But that's exactly what I think the crown should be about. I do not believe that Harry, or unfortunately I'm related to her, Meghan, I don't, that should be like a footnote. But why is it important to include that? That's the question that I'm asking. Why is it important to include that in there, especially after the Queen's death, except for sensationalism? Now, to me, that is sensationalism. I don't, why are they not focused or focusing on Prince William and Kate Middleton and their children, because he is next in the line of succession, because we don't really know how long C Unit's going to be King George III. But I feel that's what we should focus on, because Queen Elizabeth spent a lot of time grooming Prince William, because let's all face it, and it was detailed in the press many times of how disappointed Queen Elizabeth was in her son, but she doted on her grandson. And people were just like looking over Charles. We're all looking to William. So I don't see why they're not pivoting towards that, but instead you want to bring up Meghan Markle and Harry, and they've left the country, as far as I'm concerned, really in a bad way, to make the royal family look awful. And you want to spend time on that. To me, I don't think that's the right direction really to go in. And I really feel that it is is inappropriate, because they were very distasteful with a lot of things that they said about the royal family, and especially the queen.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I felt that a lot of what was said were probably very private things that should have been kept private. The other
Mhm.
thing that I was going to say is that she hasn't known the family long enough, in my opinion, to make these kinds of statements about the family. I mean,
Mhm.
after all, wait a few more years and see how things work out. And she can step away if she wants to. I'm not entirely convinced that Harry may have wanted to do this, but
I don't
he
think he
wants to
did.
keep his marriage together. So he's going to go with this. But to be honest with you, Lorena, marrying into a family like the British royal family is not like marrying into an ordinary family.
No, it is not.
They certainly are very different. And, you are going to have to give up some of your freedom to be part of this family. Your life is not your own anymore. So there is a price to pay for living that type of lifestyle. Certainly,
Mhm.
that it was never a secret that that was the case. And I think that it's unfortunate. And also it felt very abrupt. The wedding, and then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, things were not great. And I wondered to myself, okay, um,
Mhm.
a lot of it seemed almost as if Megan was very ill informed. And I thought everybody had heard about the British press, how intense they are.
Yes, they no one can throw shade quite like the British press.
Yes,
And I just found it I want to say idiotic that she didn't know that,
I
considering how the press is, considering how insular the royal family is. Royalty has a certain way of doing things. And when you marry into that particular family, especially a royal family, like you were saying, your life is not your own. There are certain things, that you have to do. There's certain ways to stand on ceremony. There's certain things you don't say.
exactly. And certainly this was something I think that uh, because of what we've all known in the past for some of the marriages in the family, I
Mhm.
wouldn't want to repeat. I feel like mistakes were repeated. That she didn't learn from the history of what had happened
Mhm.
in the family. And honestly, in interviews like that, they don't help the individuals involved, and they certainly don't help the situations overall. They don't really benefit anyone. So I just felt it was really in poor taste, unnecessary. We would have
Yeah.
understood if they decided that it was too much to be in the royal family. That totally, if they had said that, this was just too much for us. We can't
Yeah.
deal with it. She could say, I didn't grow up this way. It wasn't for me, but I respect them. And we would have said, okay.
Yeah,
And,
it's not for everyone, and you're not burning bridges and purposely just I want to say, for lack, like kicking dirt on a country that is very proud of its monarchy, for the most part, very proud of the monarchy. and a country that's willing to accept you as you marry into the royal family, and this is what you do, and you take their prince away from them. It was, I've told millions of people, I'm like, oh, several people, and, it's almost and it is embarrassing as an American to have that happen, because most Americans know the deal, because we've seen it with Diana about marrying into the royal family.
Yes,
But to
we
act that way, just no.
and yeah, so if anybody in the royal family is watching this, which I doubt they are, but we just want to say we're sorry that that happened.
Yeah, we really apologize for
Yeah,
Megan. We
because
don't we don't want her back, but
that's not, I think, reflective of the average woman in the United States. I think that
no.
the average woman would treat herself and, you know, her let's say the family that is essentially going to be the grandparents and relatives of her child with more dignity and respect going forward, no matter what. So certainly,
Mhm.
you know, I think we can all take home a little bit of a lesson, and I think Diana and Charles were the lesson. You know, we saw what happened in that. We don't want to see that again, but you know, it's almost as if we saw a little bit of that again. So not a good move on her part, I think. But the actual series, The Crown, has also hit a few more speed bumps, and this is the last article, Lorena, that just came out. Actually, this is from last year. What am I saying? This is, I actually meant to do this one before,
Mhm.
but it refers to season 5, and it has to do with the consultant who is actually handling The Crown, the show, and they felt that they had to kind of leave the show because of how people were portrayed in it. And this actually has me
Mm.
concerned in a sense because you know, it is something to think about, and about, you know, the legacy of the show, that someone would feel that they have to kind of walk away from this. Um,
That's really bad. I'm trying to think
yeah,
what about her portrayal,
yeah. And
or oh, I'm
the
sorry, go ahead.
no, pardon me. I'm sorry. Here it says in 2019, Peter Morgan asked me to co-write the 5th series of The Crown, which is the one that's going to be debuting soon. And it says the episodes which concerned Princess Diana's last years before she died. After a great deal of thought, having never spoken publicly about this before, I decided to contribute. Okay. And
Mhm.
she says, we worked together on the outline and
Mhm.
scripts when our co writing agreement was not honored. And when I realized that particular storyline would not necessarily be told as respectfully or compassionately as I had hoped, I requested that all my contributions be removed from the series, and I declined a credit. Now, Lorena, this is the type of integrity I think that's missing in a lot of situations like this. She was a
Mhm.
friend, I guess, of late Diana. Um,
Mhm.
and you know, she feels that this is not anything she can be involved in. I thought that that was very interesting, the idea that someone would feel that they have to step away because of the way people are portrayed. I'm particularly concerned about the portrayal um, of Dodie and his father, because it was so controversial at the time. It
Mhm.
hasn't been, I guess, you know, it's been 20 over 20 years now, but honestly, it's still very controversial in the sense. Um, and I am kind of concerned about it, but it's something to think about going forward. Certainly, they at some point may decide to put Meghan and Harry in one of the perhaps
Mm.
season 6, something to think about. But I think anybody who feels that they have to at some point step away because they feel it's necessary for the story to be told respectfully and compassionately certainly does show that there are writers out there who have integrity. It's more important for them to have a respectful story told. They don't
Mhm.
necessarily need to go ahead and make a mockery of something that was hard to watch. It says the period of time covered in season 5 includes Diana's romances with British surgeon Hasnat Khan and Egyptian film
Mhm.
producer, Dodi El Fayed, as well as her controversial interview with Martin Bashir. So this is going to be a little bit harder, I think, for a lot of us to watch. I um, I think, and you and I have spoken about Diana in the past. Um,
Mhm.
it could not have been easy to have been part of the family then. Certainly, I have to give her credit for doing everything she could for a good part of the time, making it work. And this was the 80s. She was
Mhm.
the first person to be under that microscopic eye, the first one to have paparazzi really kind of hounding
Yes.
away. It was really very different. It was unlike anything I think we'll ever see again in history. She had to endure a lot of stuff that none of us really are going to ever have to endure, because those thresholds have either already been met, or they don't mean the same thing anymore. So I certainly think that she's paid her dues, so to speak, in an era
Mhm.
where she couldn't walk down the street without photographers trying to take millions of
Right, pictures of her.
and selling a photograph for $100,000,
Mhm.
almost unheard of today, but was quite common at that time. With Remember those super long telephoto lenses, and
Yeah, and it's just like all, the flashes going off and people like stalking her and uh
I hope they do that part respectfully. And I hope we do see some incredible performances. Of course, we know we're going to see how Queen Elizabeth is portrayed during that time. And it also must have been very difficult for her as well and the rest of the family. So that's another element that I'm sure we'll see. But Lorena, any final thoughts about about the Crown series 1 through 4 and your expectations for season 5? Any thoughts and concerns?
well, I just started watching season 2 of The Crown. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. There's so much history that I studied about Queen Elizabeth and the royal family and about British politics that I get to see, on screen, especially seeing Winston Churchill. And I cannot wait to see Lady Margaret Thatcher because thanks to her, it's ingrained in my brain that your outfit has to match your purse.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just love all of her quotes, Lady Margaret Thatcher's quotes. I mean, I absolutely love them. So I'm looking forward to finding out more about these characters being brought to life. Some that we only saw like in pictures, and then eventually maybe later on in video that we got to see. And with season 5, I really do hope that they are respectful in the way of how they treat what happened with Diana, because I think one of the things that the writers, I hope they kept in mind, is that Diana really wasn't just the Princess of Wales. She had a groundswell of support from other countries, including, you know, the United States. So if there's any royal outside of Elizabeth that Americans are super zeroed in on, it would have been Diana, because we're used to seeing her, watching the kids grow up. The kids were frequently visiting the United States. So I would hope that they would do it in a respectful, but also factual, because some factual things that happen, but that it's not just blatant sensationalism, especially when it comes to what happened with her death, and especially how it affected her kids. And I just really hope that they do, and I really hope that they just stay away from the whole Harry and Meghan thing, because I'm not interested in that. I'm hoping that season 5 will not end up like season 8 of Game of Thrones. Let's just put to you like that. We cannot have that. Sorry, sorry, not sorry.
No, I think that is the best point of them all, Lorena. We certainly don't want to see them drop the ball on what has been a stellar depiction of the royal family. And we do know it's a dramatization. As you said, we didn't need to be told that. We know that nobody recorded all these special scenes inside of the palace. This was sort of a historical fiction version of this based on real events. Certainly well done, beautifully enacted. The lovely scenes inside the palace, which are breathtaking, certainly do paint this picture and put us inside in what we believe may have occurred during those moments. But certainly we knew it was fictitious, everybody. It's a
Mm-hmm.
dramatization of these, obviously, of the royals' lives. And, I think that certain groups can be left out. I don't think that their impact has been felt, nor do I think it will. I think, like you said, Lorena, it would have been great to go right into William and Kate and kind of figure out that whole thing. If you recall, I think they went to, what was the college that they went to? Um, they went to the same college. I can't remember the name of the college. I don't know whether it was like St. Andrews. It might be St. Andrews. I think
Okay.
I think they went to St. Andrews, and Kate and William both finished their degrees, and I think she encouraged him. I could be getting some of these details wrong, but I think she encouraged him to finish his master's degree or at least his college degree. And there are
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of royals who have finished their degrees.
Yeah.
He might be one of the few of the royals that have done that. But also, they separated for a while, and they famously got back together. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was Take That, or one of those groups where they sang the song. Whatever I said, whatever I did, I didn't mean it. I just want you back for good. And I think it gave a message to her, if I remember correctly. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
romantic. They ended up back together, and she lived with him for a little while, understanding what it would mean to have, be into royal life at the palace, Lorena.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, Kate did her homework. And You can
Yes.
see they have a successful marriage, beautiful children. Certainly, it is something that they both worked for. I think that as young adults, and essentially getting their degrees together, it certainly gave them time to get to know one another and for
Mm-hmm.
the royal family to get to know Kate. And so
Mm-hmm.
those things are so critical. I feel like, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but this is just how I feel. I feel that perhaps Harry and Meghan may have rushed things a bit before they could truly get to know each other better. So I hope that
Mm.
things do work out for them for sure. But
I hope so
sometimes
too.
when you don't know someone too long, things like this can, happen, where it makes things more difficult for you when things change a bit. When you have a child, things do change. And we've seen many of the royal family, have to kind of do their duty, and their kids are, somewhere, if someone's watching them. They don't
Mm-hmm.
always bring them. Diana brought her kids around a lot, but they weren't with her 24/7, like most moms, especially working mothers who have to do that. So she's
Mm-hmm.
not the only one who would have to do that. There are so many of you who may be parents out there, and you know what I mean. Sometimes someone has to watch your child when you go to work or
Mm-hmm.
those other things. So I think Meghan is very lucky that she can take her child wherever she goes, but that is
Mm-hmm.
not the norm, Lorena. I think for most women, especially professional women and men. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy that she can do that, certainly, but it's not the norm. Good for her. I hope things work out, but it's too early and too soon to include them in a series like this. Uh,
Way too early. I just want to say, like with William and Kate, they're almost like I would say our peers, so to speak.
yes.
When we see them, it's like we identify kind of like with, with what they've gone through, kind of how their courtship is like, they're raising, children. They're not as young now, but they're a little bit older. But we just identify with them. They're our peers, and it's kind of like that's the story. I feel like we want we want to see. What is it like, Queen Elizabeth as your grandma? That's what we want to see. That's,
Yeah.
what we want to know. So I really do hope they get more into that because I love that story. I followed that, story for the long the longest time. And I really do. I really do want them to to stay together. I really do.
Yeah, I agree with you. We'll see what happens. We're both keeping our fingers crossed for them.
Yes. Fingers
Um,
crossed and prayers as we are.
Absolutely. Well, Lorena, thank you so much for joining me for this episode, uh,
Welcome.
where we're looking at The Crown. We're so excited for this series. It certainly has been an exciting series, and I look forward to learning a little bit more about what you think as you continue to watch the series and come back. We can talk about it. You and I are going to be covering The Crown season 5. We're going to be reviewing each of the episodes here
Hmm.
on Positive Fandom. I'm so looking forward to this, Lorena. It certainly is a pleasure to watch and talk about the series with you. Lorena, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me several places. You can find me on Twitter, you can find me on Instagram, and of course, you can find me on YouTube for various videos and live streams.
Wonderful, guys. Please do check out Lorena's channel. Like and subscribe her channel. Lorena has such incredible content. She has watch parties, reviews. She's an expert on the parks, guys. If you want to know what's going on in the parks, and not just one park, all of them. So if you are interested in going to the parks, check out her channel where she live streams so you can see what's actually there.
Mhm.
And those disrespectful desserts segments that
Yes.
are amazing. You and I are going to go to the Floridian one of these days, Lorena, and have a high tea and really
Oh,
enjoy
yes.
that. So everybody, please do like and subscribe Lorena Creole's channel, and everybody check me out and Lorena
Yes.
on
Yes.
Ladies of the
Subscribe.
BGS on
Hmm.
Robert Meyer Burnett's channel, the Post Geek Singularity, at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays. And of course, our other show on your Twitch channel on Thursdays, Toxic Male Appreciation, everybody. Certainly do check us out there as well. So, for all of you watching, thank you so much for tuning in on this show.
Hmm.
We are so excited for The Crown. This is a very exciting time. Thank you
Yes.
for tuning in. And for everybody out there, no matter where you are, always do remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.